My name is Joel O'Quinn. Rank was E5, AQ2. I enlisted in December of '67, went to boot camp in March of '68 out of San Diego, California. It was quite an experience. From being used to being able to get up kind of when you wanted to being up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning under strict observation at all times, had someone telling you when, where, and what to do, instead of getting up and going to the vocational technical schools that I was going to when I enlisted. It was quite an experience of change and at times quite stressful. Went through the gas chambers, went in there, had to pull your mask off. They'd ask you one of your 10 rules of walking a military post, or one of your 10 regulations that you had to know. And if you didn't know it, they repeated it to you, and you spent that much longer in the gas chamber before you get back out. And yet they'd ask numbers of different people different questions, so nobody got asked the same thing. Then we went to firefighting school, and it was quite intense, handling a 2.5-inch hose. And then they moved us over from a 2.5-inch hose to a 5-inch hose, and it took 13 people to hold the hose. Walking into a big, huge tub of burning flames, you were like, what am I doing and why am I here? It was quite an experience. I did not get assigned at the same place that any of my fellow boot camp recruits were sent. Everybody was kind of sent in different directions. Some went straight to ships as seaman apprentice. Others went to different schools for different technical training. So I actually never ran across another one of my boot camp recruits the whole time I was in the Navy. Graduated from boot camp late May of '68. And from there I went to NATTC, Naval Air Technical Training Center in Memphis, Tennessee, for avionics training. I became a AQ for the aviation fire control. I was interested in naval air. I was basically an auto mechanic before I went into service. I signed up thinking I was going to be able to get into jet aircraft mechanic or the recip engine mechanic, one of the two. And during boot camp, the test and all, I didn't know when I left boot camp which school I was going to, but I knew I was going to Memphis. And I knew that Memphis taught the jet aircraft mechanics and the recip engine mechanics as well. When I checked into the barracks, I looked up at all these different insignias on the wall, and I looked at the chief that was running the barracks, and I said, "Chief, I don't see any of these insignias that looks like anything that I signed up for. I was told I was going to jet mechanic school." He said, "No, you're in avionics. You're going to be an electronics technician." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, I don't have a clue what electronics is." From there, I went to NAS Whidbey Island. Was stationed there from early '69 to mid '71. Left there in mid '71. At the Whidbey Island, I was attached to the AIMD, Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Department, where I got my technical training on the A6 aircraft radar systems. It was a beautiful base. It was well disciplined. Everything was run very smoothly. The commanding officer and everybody was straight up and straightforward. They expected you to do your job. You did your job. You had no hassles from anybody. And everything went very smooth. I enjoyed my stay there. Being as close to Canada as it was, my wife and I and small child took several occasions to cross over into Canada and went to a couple of places up there. Beautiful country. I learned the complete radar system of the A6. Then I was also instructed. I moved into the Intermediate Maintenance Department as called a module repair technician. I did not work on the box that the plane had in its radar system. I worked on the boards that came out of the box and programmed them or repaired them to function properly as a unit with the rest of the boards in the box. The discipline was great. I learned to get along with upper level and lower level people. Some rated as high as E7, E8. My relationship with them was always a good relationship, and I always tried to have a good relationship with anyone that was junior to me. Going from there to the fleet, I felt like I was prepared to go and do the job that I was assigned to do. From there, when I left there, I went to USS Saratoga, Mayport, Florida. Got aboard in '71, 2 weeks prior to making the departure for the North Atlantic Mediterranean cruise. It was quite a shock to see that a ship could be that big and float. It was, I can't exactly put it into words, it was just undefinable as to how big and how monstrous this ship really was. When I first went aboard and they started signing where you're going to go for your berthing compartments and so forth like that, finding your way around was like, okay, I'm in a maze. First time I went to sea was we left Mayport, headed for the North Atlantic, for a North Atlantic cruise, and then from there into the Mediterranean. It was very peaceful to start with. We could go out and you could look off the flight deck, look out of the hangar bays, see the beautiful ocean, sunset, sunrise, so forth, and skies and so forth were just so much different from anything I had ever experienced. And when we got into the North Atlantic, of course, and then we caught the rough seas, but it kind of changed things a little bit. Going through the North Atlantic, we ran into some quite rough seas. Everything had to be strapped down and tied down to keep from sliding or moving around during the storm that we encountered in the North Atlantic. The very first time they launched the catapults, I didn't realize that my berthing compartment was next to the catapult assemblies. And I was sound asleep when that thing fired the first time, and needless to say, I sat straight up. My first job aboard ship was to maintain the boards out of the radar system of the A6 aircraft. When we first got aboard, of course, there were no aircraft on board when we left Mayport. We picked them up. They flew out to us out of Norfolk. And I had to check the system, check the test equipment, make sure all the test equipment that we needed or that we used on the troubleshooting of this particular radar system was functional. And I had been trained thoroughly on the test bench system itself. The A6 squadron that was on board was VA-75. That was out of Oceana, Virginia. The only interaction I had with the squadron was that the people that they had trained on the same equipment that I was trained on came into the shop that I worked in. I worked side by 5 or 6 guys off of the A6 squadron crew that maintained the systems at the same system I was maintaining. Everything that we always needed for my shop was available through our supply department. We had all the resistors, transistors, ICs, components, and anything that was needed to repair the boards. We had the test benches that would test it down to the bad component, and then we would physically remove and replace that component and put it back on the test bench and verify that it worked. We didn't ever have a real supply problem of not having the components that we needed to do our repairs. Made the North Atlantic, went to Glasgow, Scotland. It was a beautiful country. There was no language barrier. You could freely go from one place to another and ask questions, and you could get answers that you could understand. Made a tour from Glasgow up to Edinburgh, saw some of the castles, and just marveled at the age and the size of these buildings that they lived in, and they were solid stone. Rhoda, Naples, Cairns, Athens, seeing all the ruins and the tour, went just out and roam around through Athens and see the ruins and so forth that was there. And to think that the years ago that these things were built and that they're still physically standing is just a marvel. The general group of the Mediterranean tour. On the med cruise, we had a 4th of July, and it was just a basic, really kind of a basic work day. We did had a different meal that day. The meal for the 4th was better than above standard of what the standard meals were. A Soviet Bear flew over us. I do remember that. I don't remember any particular NATO exercise, but the Bear flying over, somebody announced that, hey, we got a bear coming towards us. And everybody first looked and said, a bear? And said, yeah, the Soviet plane, Soviet Bear. Oh, okay. We all rushed up to the flight deck where we could stand in the catwalks and so forth and see. They had a plane in the air. Once they realized, they tracked him on radar that he was coming, they did launch a plane, and he escorted them a certain distance away from the ship. It was not allowed to fly directly over the ship. May have seen a trawler or two off to one side. Of course, we knew he was electronic surveillance, trying to listen in on anything that was going on. But that was the only thing we'd see one occasionally. It was not as a regular sight for me because I worked primarily inboard on the ship. And there were some of the guys said, oh yeah, there's one always trailing us one side or the other back, just barely in sight. The hours that I worked, I just about always worked the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. night shift. And usually by the time you worked your 12-hour shift, if you'd had a busy day all day, you got off of your tour, went to eat chow, came back from chow, showered, cleaned up, got in the bed, and slept. And occasionally we'd go up to the forecastle area. They had a workout area up there that you could do some weightlifting and so forth in. But primarily just spent most of my time either sitting around playing cards with some of the guys in the living area. Meals ran 24/7. The ship's galley never shut down. The breakfast would be starting somewhere around 5:36 in the morning. They'd switch over from mid-rats to breakfast and run till about 9 or 10 before they switched over to lunch. And from around that time, it would go to 1:30, 2:30 before it switched over to the evening meal. And then about around 10 or so at night, it switched over from evening meal to what they call mid-rats. On the everyday basis, we had the white gravy with chipped beef over toast. And on special occasions, we occasionally would have a steak. And at one time, on another cruise, we had steak and lobster. Came back to the States, had re-enlisted while I was off the coast of Italy. Came back to the States, pulled back into the States, was reassigned to Naval Air Technical Training Center again in Memphis, Tennessee for Advanced Electronics B School, which consists of 33 weeks of intense electronic training. That training was 8 hours a day, straight electronics. You learned the function and basics of how transistors, IC integrated circuits, diodes and everything. You learned the actual basic function of how they worked, and you learned how to take transistors and say you needed a matched pair, but you didn't have a matched pair come as a set. You learned how to match them up. Look at what they call families of the breakdowns of the curves, and learned how to do that. I graduated from that school, became an E5, left NATTC Memphis, back to USS Saratoga, caught up with her in the Westpac, made the rest of the Vietnam cruise. I flew from Memphis to San Francisco, California. They put me on a bus and rode me up to the Air Force base north of San Francisco. I caught a C-5A Galaxy flying out of the Air Force base. We flew from there to Hawaii, to Wake Island, to the Philippines, and I caught the ship in the Philippines. They had originally had me scheduled to fly from the Philippines into Da Nang, and was going to be flown out by the COD from Da Nang. And when I landed in Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, they told me, said, there's no need for you to fly to Da Nang, you just turn around and fly right back here. Ship's going to be in port in less than 2 weeks. So they just put me in a transit barracks for 2 weeks, and I just roamed around the base and had some free time. I never really left the base more than once or twice. I went into town maybe twice. I was not a person to go out and drink. I was not a smoker, not a drinker, so I didn't go out and participate much with the local crowd. I did see some of the old Jeeps and stuff that had been, probably were left from World War II, but the Philippines had converted them into their jitney vehicles. It had all their decorations and tassels and so forth attached to them, and they were really neat looking. Made the rest of the Vietnam cruise, Philippines, Singapore. I don't think I made Hong Kong, but was in the general vicinity. We started off the line period one time, pulled away from the line, was gone for about 4 days off the line. One of the other carriers had a malfunction. They turned us around and sent us back to the line. So we spent another 30 days on the line and missed our port in Sydney, which I really wish we could have made. It was unusual. You know, the waters looked a little bit different. They were kind of a shade of blue different from the water in the Mediterranean. There was times that the water in the Pacific was so clear you looked like you could look to the bottom of the ocean, and you really could only see 50, maybe 60 feet, but it looked like it just went forever. And to watch the dolphins off the bow of the ship at times. Well, I knew where I was going, I knew what the ship looked like, I knew what was going on with it, and I knew the people that I was going to be working with because they had the same crew that was running AIMD then that was on it when I made my first cruise. So I was comfortable going back to it. Wasn't really comfortable with having to go to Vietnam, but that was assignment duty and we went. My role basically was the same as it was before. I worked in the same shop, worked on the same equipment, except I was an E5 instead of an E4, and my responsibilities as a more senior petty officer, I had to help train and teach some of the younger guys that were coming aboard that were getting their new experience. I was not aboard when they went over, but I did participating of the crossing of the line coming back and became a shellback. It was quite intensive. You went through the initiation was you crawled around on the flight deck. You went through tubes with garbage and what they called it garbage. It was actually some different greasy stuff that they had put in there and mixed up. And then they had the shillelagh line that you had to go through, and everybody got a whack at your rear as you crawled by. And I was fortunate enough that when I came up to the tube to go into it, one of the guys at the very front of the tube grabbed me by the collar of the shirt and said, "You go this way, you'll get stuck in there." Because I'm 6'4", and the tube was made for this little bit smaller guys. So I didn't end up going through the tube, but I knew a lot of guys that did. The worst rough seas we had was when we were up in the north end of the South China Sea, and a typhoon caught us up there. And we were taking 32-degree rolls from one side to the other. Uneasy, very uneasy, because at either 33 or 34 degrees, they said the ship kept going. And you were sitting there, somebody had a pendulum set up in our shop, and you could see it swing from one side to the other. And one of the guys finally said, "Take that thing down. You're making me more nervous than I already am." In the fire in Singapore, yes, I was on board. I was in my berthing compartment or in my workshop, which is one deck difference. And when they sounded the fire alarm in general quarters for the fire alarm, everybody went to their designated area, and if your area was close to where the fire was, you went and fought the fire. The process of what I heard that happened was that there was a fuel transfer valve that ruptured and preheated fuel against the side of the boiler and it ignited. And completely wiped out that main machinery space and severely damaged the space next to us, but we still had two full units that was working and were functional enough we could, because we were in the process of sitting in Singapore was our last port before we headed home, and we got everything up and running and headed back to the States. Came back to the States. We were the first ship pulled back into the States after the declaration of the war in Vietnam was classified as over. We pulled back into Mayport. We're in Mayport approximately 2 weeks. Ship loaded the families aboard, cars and everything. We loaded up, went to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, Portsmouth, Virginia. Spent 18 months in overhaul. The dry dock experience was we first off, leaving Virginia, Mayport, going up, they loaded our families, our cars and everything on board the ship, and we drove them up the ramp onto the hangar bay, and then they took them up to the flight deck and tied them down. And we got to Portsmouth, unloaded them off of a ramp down onto the pier. We spent a total overhaul. They had the main drive shafts, the propellers. We sat in dry dock for probably 8 months or so. And as an E5 on board, I was assigned a crew of paint chippers. There was a crew that generally had messed up doing something somewhere and had gotten assigned duty that you did not prefer. And I didn't really prefer having to run the crew because I had to sit and listen to the air chippers and everything run all day long and be around where all the paint was being chipped at. We had the fire in Portsmouth. I was on board the night the fire broke out. Liberty had just commenced about 4:30, and between 5 and 5:30 the fire alarm went off. We fought fire all night and went into several compartment areas with the OBA and some breathing equipment on, fighting the fire, trying to keep things from spreading. Came out of one of the compartment fires. My OBA had ran out of air. I was struggling to breathe when I came out. Somebody grabbed me and said, "Are you okay?" And once I got my mask ripped off, I said, "Got a good breath of air?" I said, "Yeah, I'm okay now." And they said, "Well, we got a job." And they took me up on the flight deck, and I ran around toting blueprints of the ship for the officers to look at and say, "Okay, we need to cut holes here, here, here." And there were several times when we cut a hole through the flight deck, there'd be 3.5, 4 foot of flame come out of the hole that they cut through to be able to force water in. And 5:30 the next morning, we rolled up the first hose. It took another 6, 7 months. We were originally scheduled to be there 12 months. We ended up being there 18. That it was always capable of doing the job that it was assigned for, and never turned down a opportunity to take us to where it needed to be, to defend this country. Upon completion of overhaul, the ship was pulling out to go to Norfolk for shakedowns. I was due rotation from sea duty to shore duty, so I got attached to NAS Oceana, Virginia Beach, Virginia. Spent the rest of my military time there from late 74, early 75 to August of 77, where I was discharged. I was attached to AIMD, the Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Department at Oceana, Virginia, maintaining the radar system and test equipment, preparing the boards, and in the process of, before going to Oceana, I had been assigned to go to school for micro-miniature repair tech, and I was a certified micro-miniature repair tech to replace the components, the super small IC chips and so forth that were mounted on the boards. And sometimes you sit under a microscope for 4 hours replacing components.